r/no sleep. Posted by you/02321. I work as a PI and a government agent approached me to help with a case. Part 1. I work as a private investigator and it's not at all as glamorous as you would think. Nearly all of my cases involve spying on cheating spouses. I'm really the only PI in the area, so if you have a cheating spouse, I'm the only real option. I've never helped the police on a case and figured that was something movies and books made up. I've done 2 missing persons cases because the families were so desperate for leads. In the end, I didn't find anything useful, so I didn't charge them for my time. I sent the cases off to other private investigators a few cities away. They also came up empty even with police connections, and that made me feel slightly less useless. In short, my career has been pitiful. Nothing interesting has ever happened. I felt as if I would be stuck with cheating cases until I died. Then, I met him. I was sitting in my car waiting for a couple to come out of a motel. I'd gotten shots of the husband and the side piece, now I just needed a time-stamped photo of them leaving. It was boring work and I normally played audio books or podcasts while I waited. A tapping on my window startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone to come up to my car. I was parked legally, so at first, I assumed it was a person asking for spare change. It happened from time to time in the rougher parts of town. But the person who was trying to get my attention wasn't begging for change. He was dressed in a suit. Unable to figure out who the hell he was, I rolled down my window while keeping an eye on the motel. "You're Skylar West, correct? I am here to ask for your assistance." He flashed on official-looking badge. His voice was monotone and emotionless. Overall, I got a weird vibe from him. He was dressed in a suit, but his hair color was unnatural. A strange orange verging on pink in the right light. And it was long enough to be pulled back into a small ponytail. He couldn't be a detective or any kind of job in law enforcement with hair dyed like that. Also, instead of calling, he approached my car. Not my office, but he cornered me on a job. "I didn't catch your name, or your creds. You flashed your badge too fast," I commented, leaning out the window. He paused while placing the badge back inside his suit pocket, unaware of how quickly he showed it. His eyes creeped me out. They were dark and as emotionless as his voice. "I apologize. I am Nicholas Flint. I work as a government agent, however this job I am approaching you about is more of a personal issue." He commented and let me look at his badge for as long as I wanted. It looked official, but fakes nowadays did look pretty real. If the job he wanted me to look at was personal, it explained why he tracked me down. Most likely he did not want to get caught being seen going into my office or have my number on his call logs. Finding my car was easier than finding a pay phone in the age of cell phones. I should have been more suspicious of him, but he gave off such a neutral vibe I trusted him enough to at least hear what he came here for. "All right, Nikki, come on in and talk before you blow my cover," I commented while gesturing to my passenger seat. He paused again, looking as if he'd never been called by a nickname before and was confused over who Nikki was. Before he got into my car, he took a small notebook out from his pocket and wrote something down and snapped it shut. I wondered what that was all about but didn't ask. He got into the car and wasted no time telling me the reason why he was there. Jenna Gates disappeared yesterday night while walking down a hiking trail with her friends. He explained and pulled out a photo of a girl no older than 10. "She looks pretty young. Aren't the cops involved? Why would you be asking me for help?" I asked, handing the photo back. "She's my niece. Due to her parents' rocky relationship, the police are set on the theory her father took her from the trail and is hiding where she is. I do not believe that is the case. It has only been a day, but so far there are no solid plans to search the woods further." He explained but still used the same emotionless tone while talking about a missing family member. I thought of the small amount of information I received so far. Jenna and Nick looked nothing alike, which was understandable. She was his niece and could have a few reasons why there aren't any family resemblance. The cold way of speaking could just be how he was. Or he pushed his emotions down to deal with the case. Still, something felt very odd about the entire thing. "So, what? You're asking me for help because you're her family and can't work the case? Is that it?" I asked, eyebrow raised. "Correct. I cannot be on this case. You are the only private detective in this city. There are others more experienced with cases such as this, however they are too far away. I would like to start looking for her tonight if possible. I do not care about finding the one responsible for her disappearance. I would only want to find the girl safe." He explained while staring forwards. I let what he said sink in. I wasn't convinced that this girl was his niece. But why lie about something like that? Questions ran through my mind over this stranger that I invited in my car. My phone pinged and I checked it on reflex. Nicholas stayed silent as I opened my email to see a notice from my bank. My heart was fluttering, thinking what I was seeing was a mistake. $2,000 was just deposited into my account from a company I've never seen before. I looked over at the agent in my car, his face impossible to read. I arranged payment for this case. That deposit was for your time hearing me out. You shall be paid more if you accept my request, even if the girl is found or not. I just require your assistance while searching for her. The agent said, and I felt myself sweating. This didn't make sense. Who had this kind of money to toss around? Was he trying to lure me out to sell me into human trafficking or steal my organs? Why give me $2,000 to get me to go into the woods? I might be a private detective, but that didn't mean I could see through his suspicious actions. Suddenly the agent slouched in his seat, looking nervous as if he was spotted. I looked over to the motel to see the cheating husband come out, and I snapped a few photos of him kissing someone who was not his wife. At least that job was wrapped up. Nicholas stayed hunkered down in his seat, looking slightly worried. It was good to know he could express some emotions. "What are you doing?" I asked after I finished taking the photos I needed. "You said not to blow your cover," he answered innocently. The promise of more money in my account, and his reaction, was what sealed the deal. This guy didn't appear to be someone with a nefarious plot. I decided to trust him and take the job, praying it wasn't a mistake. "Where do you want me to meet you tonight?" The next few minutes was him telling me when and where we should meet. Once all the details were clear, he got out of the car and looked both ways before crossing the road and out of sight. I knew I could trust this guy, but wondered what the hell I just got myself into. I met Nicholas at the start of a local hiking trail at 6 p.m. that night. I was wearing comfy shoes for the trek. He was still in his suit and polished shoes. "Are you going hiking in a suit and tie, Nicky?" I asked, looking him over. He didn't even have a bottle of water. He again looked confused and took out his notebook again to jot something down. Snapping it shut, he nodded. "I work a lot and do not own that much casual clothing," he replied. I wondered if he slept in a suit, but kept that to myself. I started along the trail with him close behind. I kept my eyes open but didn't know what we were looking for. Having a dog to track down the scent would be nice. I've never been a part of a search party in the woods and doubted this trip would result in anything but wasted time. "I don't know what we are going to find that the cops can't. I don't know anything about tracking. I feel as if you're wasting your money," I said as we walked. "The police are not focusing their efforts on this trail. The fact we are out here looking means something. Effort is never wasted." I wanted to argue but stayed silent. He was paying me a lot for a simple hike. We arrived where Jenna was seen last, and I took a sip of my water. I offered Nicholas some, but he refused. We both stopped to look around, hoping we would find something. It was only a few minutes from the start of the trail, and one would assume this place was safe. But something happened to that little girl. I looked along the edge and the bushes, trying to see if anything was disturbed or any obvious drag marks. But Jenna was small. A grown adult could just pick her up and run off with her. The lack of broken twigs and flattened bushes meant nothing. I still felt the entire trip was useless when something caught my eye. Tied to a tree, 2 steps off the trail, was something catching the light. I walked over to it and found it was a piece of candy with a foil wrapping hanging from a branch with some fishing line. It was low enough for a child to reach it. My blood turned cold, wondering how the hell the cops missed this. Unless they didn't. If Jenna saw this, she might have taken the candy, and the person who lured her away could have come overnight to set up the trap again. But why set it in the same spot, risking the police seeing it? "I think I have something," I called over to Nicholas. He quickly walked over to me, but neither of us touched the hanging candy. "Do you see any more?" he asked, and I didn't even consider looking for another piece. I scanned the trees and in a few seconds saw another twinkle of foil moving in a breeze. Nicholas pulled out a set of gloves so he could carefully look over the piece we already found. It was just a bright pink colored wrapping with no name brand printed on it. Was it homemade? He left it where it was and nodded to where I spotted the next piece. "We should follow the trail," he said, and I shook my head. "Shouldn't we call the cops?" I offered. "Not just yet. I doubt they are going to take 2 pieces of candy hanging from trees seriously. Unless we find something solid to take their focus from Jenna's father, they won't pay us any attention." "Shouldn't the police follow up every lead? Come on. This is weird, it's something," I commented, sounding frustrated. The agent paused, thinking about something. With his blank slate of a face, it was hard to tell if the gears were turning in his head or not. Finally, he decided on giving me some information he held back. The local police had a vendetta against Jenna's father. He was able to walk off a charge of drunk driving. The woman he nearly killed is related to the chief of police. The drunk driving was the reason why Jenna's parents split up. Beforehand, He made threats and broke down their front door in a drunken rage. Everyone was convinced it was only a matter of time before he snapped and killed his family. The police had plenty of reasons to think he harmed his daughter, but I fear this case is more personal. The chief may only care about making that man's life a living hell instead of finding Jenna. It is possible they are not searching the woods in fear they find something that proves the father is not at fault. But I started not believing what I was hearing. They're risking a little girl's life over something like that? I believe the chief does not care about his career, let alone a little girl he has no relation to. Keep in mind this is only a theory based on the actions of the police. I have no way of proving any of this. The only thing that is for certain is the police will not put the manpower into searching these woods unless a lead they cannot ignore is brought to light. My teeth clenched together in frustration. I regretted how inexperienced I was. I didn't have any kind of connections I could call up to help. Only a guy that provided some computer work and camera setup when needed. If I was a real private investigator, I could have a bunch of people over here combing these woods for clues. I felt useless trying to find this girl. Nicholas was an agent, but was unable to bring in the big guns. Jenna had the bad luck of having a father who already wore a target on his back. If she wasn't taken by him, we were the only ones really looking for her. Nicholas noticed my shift in mood and spoke. We have already found a possible lead. Even without the same resources as the police, there is a chance to find something. If we press on, we could find something better than 2 hanging candies. I nodded. He was right. At least we were searching for her. We continued on not touching the candies and leaving them for the police to collect as evidence if they listened. Plus, they doubled as a trail back to the hiking path. I didn't know about Nicholas, but I was useless in the woods. I could get lost easily without something guiding us back. The agent followed behind me as I scanned the trees looking for more candies, but also any sign of the girl. Every time I thought we lost the trail, I would notice a twinkling off in the distance. If Jenna was following these, why would she go alone? Wasn't she with friends? I asked when the thought came up. She had a small disagreement with her friends. She was lagging behind because she was angry with them. It is possible that she went off because the trail of candies was more interesting, but I cannot say for certain. Nicholas replied. I wondered more about this trail we followed. Was someone just waiting the entire day hoping by chance someone went off the trail? It was not guaranteed that a victim would follow the candies deep into the woods. And normally people who snatched children had preferences. Was Jenna really that unlucky to be good enough for her kidnapper to think she was suitable? This reminds me of Hansel and Gretel, I said while we paused to look for another flash of color in the trees. I looked over my shoulder expecting Nicholas to agree, but he looked at me with such a blank expression on his face that made me think he never heard the fairy tale before. Slowly he took out his notebook ready to write something down. This full-grown man really never heard that tale and expected me to tell it to him. I gave him an abridged version while he made notes. Snapping his small notebook shut, he followed my footsteps towards another hanging treat. I don't understand the moral of the story. Don't these tales normally have one? Was there not a better way of dealing with their situation besides dooming their children by leaving them in the woods? He asked, and I didn't have answers for him. It's just an old fairy tale. I don't think having a moral is the point of it, and maybe leaving your kids to be eaten by bears made sense back then, I said with a shrug. As we walked, we traveled deeper into the forest. I brought along a flashlight so we could keep searching until dark if needed. A hopeless feeling came creeping into my gut as I thought of hundreds different outcomes Jenna could have faced. If she wasn't at the end of this trail, then what? We couldn't search this entire forest. I don't feel as if we're doing much. I admitted finally after walking in silence for a while. What if this isn't the right path? What if someone took her, or this has nothing to do with her? Nicholas stayed silent to let me take a drink of water. Again, he refused my offering of some. I was sweating in the warm spring night. I didn't know how he was staying so cool hiking in the woods in a suit. It is possible that someone took her off the trail. Or she lost her way and is hurt somewhere waiting for someone to find her. We lack the resources to fully disprove all the theories of where Jenna may be. Right now, we can only see what is at the end of this trail and if it leads to her or not. At the very least, we are eliminating one possibility out of many. I felt annoyed that I didn't think of that obvious thing. Of course, we could only do what was within our power. Finding a dead end meant one less lead to chase after and focusing on other ideas. I assumed Nicholas would be upset working with a novice like myself. I felt overwhelmed so quickly because this case was so different from the ones I normally took on. He did not look upset in the slightest. Only a bit glad he could convince someone to look in the woods with him. Jenna isn't your niece, is she? I asked, risking the question. The way he talked about her felt distant. I doubted it from the start and wondered why he would lie. He didn't need to say she was related to him to have a reason to look for a little girl. No. I apologize for the lie. In truth, I cannot rely on the police in this area and there are no other agents to spare on such a minor case. I assumed you would be suspicious of my request, so I decided to give myself more of a trustworthy reason to find the girl. I was wary of letting him lead me into the woods, but I felt as if this guy was a decent person. I just only hoped my gut didn't prove me wrong. Getting back to the case, I looked at a hanging candy off in the distance. I guess I could trust Nicholas, but what was waiting for us at the end of the trail? Was it just a prank or would we come across someone dangerous? Do you have a weapon at least? I asked and he nodded. I didn't see a holster on his small frame but believed he was armed. I, for a few different reasons, didn't own a gun. Sure, I was a private detective but never took on a case that required one until that day. Overall, I disliked them. And I had lousy aim the few times I went to a shooting range to practice. If I got out of these woods safely, I may change my idea about owning a handgun. Let's keep going and figure out if this trail means anything. The agent followed behind with a nod. If he was the one armed, you would think he would offer to take the lead. I was the one spotting the hanging candies, and from that I assumed I had better eyesight, which made me nervous. Would he be able to shoot a person at a distance if needed? Would it come to that? The answer came when we reached the end of the candy trail. It was an answer I never would have expected. Although, it was the most obvious one, as I even commented on it earlier. What would one expect to see at the end of a breadcrumb trail in the woods? A cabin made out of candy. We walked into a small clearing to see a newly built wood cabin in the middle. No paths led to it. It made me wonder how anyone got the materials out in the middle of the woods and through the trees without leaving a trace behind. I'll take the lead, Nicholas said, finally stepping in front. I followed behind, hyper aware of any noise, or lack of noise, from the woods. The lights inside the cabin were not on, leaving the windows dark. Nicholas crept up the stairs and it sounded different. More of a hollow sound compared to the creaking what I would expect. He stopped at the door, hand on the handle. Here I thought he would need a warrant to search it, but he looked as if he no longer cared about the legal process. When he commented about only wanting to find the Jenna, he meant it. I didn't know if I should be right behind him, so I stayed on the first step. Instead of opening the door, he stopped with the handle in his hand. Skylar, you said in that tale the cabin was made out of sweets, correct? He asked, not looking in my direction. I looked over the normal-looking cabin, trying to understand his point. Well, yeah. But what does? Nicholas snapped off the handle, causing me to stop in mid-question. He raised it so I could see the broken piece, my mind not understanding what I was looking at. Instead of a metal the handle should be, it was a light brown. Walking over, he placed the broke handle in my hand. Without warning, he then kicked the railing hard enough to send parts of it flying. It did not splinter like wood, but rather cracked and crumbled. I jumped at the destruction, but I still didn't believe what I was seeing. Digging a fingernail into the handle, I took a small piece off and tasted it, confirming my suspicions. It's chocolate? I asked, dumbfounded. The railing was painted gingerbread, it seems. I assume the rest of the porch is either the same or painted chocolate. Nicholas confirmed. That couldn't be it. This was far too strange. Who the hell would build a realistic cabin out of gingerbread and chocolate? The windows looked like glass but could be made of sugar. Hell, who could afford such a joke? I was shaking my head, trying to figure out what we just walked into. Stay behind me. I'm going to kick down the door. Nicholas didn't appear fazed by the odd turn of events in the slightest. Wait, what? Aren't you wondering who the hell made this? I asked, watching him walk back up the steps. My working theory is a witch with a bad sense of humor, he said, his usual monotone voice making it impossible to tell if he was joking. I was unable to respond as he raised a shoe, now dirty from his walk in the woods, and kicked the door to pieces. He went inside the dark cabin and I dropped the fake handle to go after him. I took my flashlight out to look inside and I wished I hadn't. It was empty aside from 4 piles of what looked to be slime on the far side of the room. Nicholas swiftly made his way over to the smaller pile. This was some X-Files crap and he was acting as if everything was perfectly normal. I followed behind, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom of the cabin. It landed on one pile of the stiff transparent goop. It took me a few seconds to clue into what I was seeing. My body jerked back in reflex and I fell to the floor hard enough for one hand to break through the chocolate board. Inside the pile of goo was a skeleton. One with enough muscle on the bones and eyes remaining to make me sick. I quickly scanned the other piles to see more bodies. One in each at different stages of decomposition. The last pile, and the one Nicholas made a beeline for, was what I feared I would see. Jenna curled up in the slime, looking unharmed. I started, my throat closing up from tears. I blinked them away, knowing now was not the time to lose it. Nicholas tossed aside his suit jacket with no hesitation. He plunged his arms elbow deep in the mysterious substance and pulled the small girl out. It made an awful noise as her body was released, but the slime did not stick to her. He placed an ear against her chest while taking a pulse. But was she really alive? Unless we arrive a minute after she was placed inside that slime, how could she still be? She's fine. Still breathing, but we need to get her some treatment. Skylar, please carry her so my hands are free to fight whatever did this. Unfortunately, we cannot take the others out. My head was swimming from his words. With a shaking hand I brought my flashlight over to the almost skeleton trapped in slime. The remaining eyes flickered and moved in the skull. I screamed, darting back and dropping the flashlight. It was impossible, but the others inside the piles of slime were still alive. Almost down to bones but still aware of what was happening. I dry heaved over the thought. If Nicholas didn't snap me out of my state, I doubt we would have gotten out of that cabin without me losing a part of myself. Skylar, we need to get her home. His tone was gentle and the kindest I've heard him sound so far. I nodded, squeezing my eyes shut, forcing the important matters to the front of my mind. No matter how impossible, confusing and horrifying everything was, the only thing that mattered was getting Jenna out of those woods. I opened my eyes, now focused on the task at hand. Picking up the flashlight, I put it away. Then I picked up Jenna. Her small body felt far too light, but she was still warm instead of the cold corpse I thought she was when we arrived. I'll ask a shit ton of questions after all of this. I told Nicholas. I'll answer everything. He confirmed. Without anything else to say to each other, I started to get out of the cabin. I needed to pace myself. No matter how much I wanted to run, I was carrying extra weight and needed to be careful not to exhausted myself right off the bat. Being so focused getting down the stairs, I didn't hear Nicholas shouting my name. Turning, a blur of motion blocked my view of the agent. I held Jenna closer to protect her from whatever came between myself and the other man. The figure was covered in rags with tangled hair flowing out. Over the newcomer's shoulder I saw Nicholas reach for his waist. When he took his jacket off, I didn't see a ostler, but I hoped he had a weapon hidden. The figure that ran between us was faster than him. I nearly tripped down the stairs as I watched in horror, unable to do anything to help him. The monster thrust out a clawed hand directly into the agent's stomach, staining his white shirt with blood. His body slammed against the gingerbread boards, cracking them. The figure didn't turn to face in my direction yet, so I did not see what attacked. Instead, I saw Nicola's pale face. Run. His request was barely above a whisper. The creature clutched the claw still deep in his chest and used his body to take out the walls of the cabin, dragging Nicholas into that dark place full of nightmares. Nicholas bought us some time. I did not wait to watch what else the creature did to him. I did as he wanted and ran as fast as my legs would carry me and the still sleeping Jenna. While I ran, nearly out of my mind in fear, a cackling laugh echoed through the woods. In the back of my mind, a part of myself thought the laughing sounded like a witch. I ran until my legs could no longer move. I stopped, against a tree, panting with sweat dripping from my face. Adjusting Jenna in my arms, I gave her a quick check over to see if she was still alright. Just asleep and looking perfectly fine. My arms ached from carrying her, but I refused to set her down. Instead, I awkwardly placed her on my back, hoping the change in how I carried her would help my arms. I needed to keep going. The sun was setting and I was hopelessly lost. No hanging candy in sight. Still, no matter how desperate the situation felt, I could not give up on getting this girl back home. It was the last thing Nicholas asked. I felt a pang of guilt through my chest. The thing that attacked the agent wasn't human, I knew that. Still, I felt as if I should have done more. If I was the one attacked, he might have had more hope of getting Jenna out of these woods. If only he was here. But he wasn't. It was a fact I needed to accept. My breathing returned to normal, so I needed to keep going. Shifting Jenna a little, I stared back into the trees, listening in case I was followed. My heart jumped in my throat when I noticed a flash of color through the trees and in the dimming light. I forced myself to not run over to the hanging candy I was positive I would never see again. I started to look for a second one, but paused to think. Was the trail of candies made by the creature that attacked Nicholas and took Jenna? Could I trust where they lead? Did I even have any other choice but to follow them? My cell phone was in my pocket, but checking it I found it useless. The screen flickered, making it impossible to check if I even had a signal. I suppose if what was after us could keep people alive as skeletons, it could easily mess with a cell phone. My brain still couldn't believe half of what I'd seen that day. However, I didn't need to believe it. I just needed to get the hell out of those woods. As night fell, I decided to follow the candy trail, hoping it was the right choice. When it became too dark to see, I took the flashlight out to guide my way while still keeping a hold of the girl on my back. Every sound in the woods made me jump and scan the trees looking for the source. No moon shone, making the woods so dark I couldn't see anything beyond my beam of light. Grabbing a flashlight that day was a good idea. My water bottle stayed inside my bag because I didn't know how long I was going to be in the woods for. Every step, I hoped for the hiking trail, but deep down I knew I should be prepared to be lost for at least a night. Cursing myself, I realized I dumbly didn't tell anyone where I was going. If I didn't make it out of there, no one would be looking for me. But, aside from my sister who lived a state away, I didn't have anyone in my life to notice I was missing until after a few days. Walking along in the dark woods, I feared I wouldn't find my way out every time I couldn't find the next hanging candy after a few minutes. Without my phone I was unable to know how much time passed, but my body felt like I'd walked for hours. A wind blew, rustling the leaves and also bringing a soft whisper to my ears. Something that I couldn't dismiss as a natural sound. A voice from behind fluttered in the air so low I couldn't make out the words. When it came again, it was stronger and enough for me to hear what it was saying. "Give me the girl." Turning on my heel in a blind panic, I directed the beam of light into the trees where the voice came from. A dark figure stood in the distance, almost too far for me to see it. I heard the request again from a raspy low voice from that figure watching us. When I didn't respond, it took a step closer as I took a step back. When the figure moved, pale arms extended from the rags it used as clothing. The arms became so long as it reached forwards, it could almost grab a hold of us. Instead, it took a step and the creature's legs grew in the same way the arms did. Nearly stumbling to the ground, my legs refused to move as the monster changed from a small figure in the distance to a massive thing. As it grew, trees were pushed aside to make room for the giant pale body. A tangle of hair remained over the face, leaving only a twisted grin visible. Wrapping long fingers around two trees, it brought that horrible face as close as possible to me, rancid breath ruffling my clothing. "Give me the girl," it demanded again. Despite the creature's size, the voice was soft and low. "Fuck that." Grabbing a fist-sized rock, I tossed it at the monster, knowing it wouldn't do anything. I then turned and ran again, refusing to face the monster that simply cackled at my response. The ground shook with the sound of the laughter, nearly making me lose my footing. The last thing Nicholas said went through my mind. I didn't think about the monster or where I was going. I just thought of that one word. Run. I work as a PI and a government agent approached me to help with a case. Part 2. My body forced another break. This time I found a small gully to sit at the bottom of, because my lungs burned and legs shook. That thing easily killed Nicholas. Running felt pointless, and yet I still wasn't dead. As I let the cold night air cool my face, I wondered over that fact. I was still alive. Surely, I wasn't outrunning something like that? So why was I still alive? When I stopped, I placed Jenna in my arms and against my chest. That thing, that witch I decided to call it, wanted her back. I would never trade her life for my own. While I rested and listened, I thought of a theory. The witch could kill me at any time. But it wanted me to give up. To hand over Jenna because it found my fear amusing. That bitch might not have any plans on letting me escape from those woods, and that thought nearly made me lose all hope. I'd turned off the flashlight to not give away my location, while staring off in the never-ending darkness, thinking over what I was going to do. In the end, I wondered if Jenna would ever forgive me for using her, as it was clear that the witch was only letting me live because I still had her. Getting to my feet, I kept her on my back again to continue off into the woods. If that witch came again, I would give her Jenna only if she killed me. My death would mean something because I used everything I had to protect a little girl, even if it didn't matter in the end. I wasn't being brave. I was terrified. And using a small child to justify moving forwards. With no weapons and no hope of escaping, I was going to face that witch. With accepting my own death, my fear felt manageable. It's a strange feeling knowing something terrible was going to happen, but you don't have any control over it. The witch's powers could be anything, and yet I walked ready to face it with shaking knees. By some miracle, the woods started to become lighter. I couldn't believe it. Not only was dawn approaching, but I spotted a hanging candy. Then another. A light feeling started in my chest as I followed the line of color until I reached an opening in the woods and nearly cried when I saw it was the hiking trail. My clothing was dirty and torn, and my body ready to collapse. I'd made it. Well, almost made it. The trail gave me a second wind as I started walking along it, convinced I was going to live. That was a mistake. Sensing something at my back, fear struck my entire body, killing any flames of hope in my chest. Slowly turning around, I looked until I heard a noise that directed my attention to the tree line. Floating above the hiking trail staring down at us was the witch in the smaller form covered in rags. You bitch, I hissed so angrily, I thought I tasted blood. I wasn't nearly out of the woods. It let me get this far. It gave me hope just to take it away. I wanted to kill the bastard for not only what it put me through but what it did to Nicholas. As I thought of Jenna on my back and the people left behind in the cabin, my rage grew as I stared down the monster that caused all of it. I suppose it was not the expression it wanted. The witch let out a cackling laugh when I first looked up, but the sound faded as I glared upwards fuming. I was unarmed, but the witch almost looked unsettled by my expression. Clearly enraged over my reaction, it outstretched pale, bony arms to the side of its body. More laughter burst out as a new crackling sound surrounded us. Flashes of light burst in the sky and the air started to smell different. My chest tightened and I knew a storm was coming and that this creature could control it. A loud crack erupted from the sky as a flash of light came crashing down a few meters away, blowing a tree to pieces. My body tensed from the noise and light, but I refused to react. I wasn't going to give this witch the satisfaction of getting any more fear from me. More lightning strikes crashed around us as a gust of wind picked up, spreading the smell of fires from the trees. I still stood my ground with a small child on my back, yet unable to do anything but glare. As the lightning died down, the witch floated closer, face twisted in a snarl. It was done showing off. The next strike would take my life because I stopped being amusing. I wondered if I should put Jenna down so she could avoid getting killed. The eyes inside that fleshless face made me realize a quick death was better than handing her over to the witch. Bracing myself, I stood, fear causing my heart to beat so hard I felt faint, and yet I still kept the glare on my face. What happened next was far too fast for my eyes to follow. A burst of sound came from the left before the witch tossed a hand in my direction and a bolt of lightning burst forth a second after. What came before the movement sounded like something I'd never heard before. Almost like metal swinging down but with a more musical tone. When the flash of lightning crashed to the ground, my eyes closed and my body tensed up as I expected to feel some pain at the very least. Instead, a booming crack exploded as the lightning crashed down to earth, but inside that was the same almost musical sound I'd heard before. I was holding my breath waiting for the end that didn't come. The crackling surrounding me and the lack of pain made me open my eyes to be able to see what the hell just happened and why I was still standing. On either side of the trail were sparks of electricity, traveling through the trees and dying down. The witch was still floating in the air. Suddenly before my eyes, the creature split in half and fell hard to the ground. A deep groove in the trail continued on for at least a mile in front of the one who just saved my life. My mouth fell open and I stared in shock at the man I was certain had died. "Nick?" I asked in a strained voice. He stood, facing where the witch once was. In his hand, something glittering drew my eyes to it. He was holding a thin blade with a hilt that looked similar to a fencing sword, but a bit thicker. The gold delicate hilt looked far too beautiful for one to be used in battle. With one more clear sound he placed the sword back into the hilt at his side. Looking over his shoulder, he faced me with the same emotionless expression he always wore. "I need to reintroduce myself. I am Nicholas Flint. I am a government agent and work as an executioner of supernatural creatures," he said in a cool voice that made my chest flutter. Judging from how the lightning struck, Nicholas either cut it in half or deflected it with his musical sword. I never fully understood the word awestruck until I looked at a man who literally cut lightning. Even after all the horrors I'd witnessed, I felt myself thinking Nicholas was the coolest person on the planet. He ruined that in half a second when he pulled out a pink flip phone weighed down by countless charms. The appearance of the flip phone made me see him as just Nick again, and I've never gotten the same vibe of overwhelming confidence from him since. I sank to my knees unable to deal with everything that just happened as Nick reported the events over the phone. 1 alive, 3 unable to be saved. 1 witch killed. I'll be bringing the survivor and my temporary partner to the start of the trail. After he was finished speaking, he snapped his phone shut and walked over to take Jenna from my back. He gave me a few minutes to recover enough to be able to walk again. His suit looked as spotless as it was when we first entered the woods, and that was another question to ask about, but not the most pressing one at the moment. Exhaustion set in and I silently followed him to where emergency crews set up at the start of the trail. Jenna was placed inside an ambulance to be taken away. Nick guided me to an SUV with an open trunk, letting me sit to wait for him. For some reason he placed a blanket over my shoulders resembling one that people who suffered some sort of shock would get. It took him a while to get back to me. I checked my phone expecting to see a night passed, but was shocked to see we were only in those woods for an hour. After all the activity died down, Nick came back over, ready to answer my questions, but my mind was racing and I didn't know where to start. "So, you're a supernatural creature that kills other bad ones? And secret agent that couldn't ask the police to help you track down that witch?" I asked, trying to get the facts straight in my head. I received a blank expression and Nick took one step away. It appears you figured everything out yourself. I don't think I'm needed. If it wasn't for his monotone voice, I would think he made a joke. I caught his suit jacket to pull him back, not even close to being done. I have so many questions, so don't you dare leave. Why didn't you kill that witch when we first saw it? How are you still alive without so much of a scratch, and why did you even need me in those woods? I'm human and couldn't do jack shit. My voice trembled as I forced myself to be angry, instead of breaking down and crying. Another long pause came between us as Nick let my head cool before he spoke. In that time, I already thought of the answer to my first question. Nick couldn't kill the witch without risking killing us. I was behind the creature. It was just bad luck, and he said as much. The witch was in a poor placement and I took a hit to let you get to a safe spot before I attacked. I doubted the creature knew and just got lucky. For what I am. It is complicated. I am able to absorb other supernatural creatures in order to heal or absorb objects made by supernatural means. As you ran, my plan was to use the cabin and heal, then go after you. I'd hoped to kill the witch before it left, but it slipped past me, and well, I made a grave mistake letting you go off alone, he said with a hint of a sigh. You don't say. I replied, but my sarcasm was lost on him. The reason why I asked you for your assistance is I required a human to follow the trail. The witch made their own territory in a way that supernatural creatures could not find the entrance. When it comes to magic, it's not as powerful as you would think. I could not find the trail, but nothing kept me from following a human who could. He explained, and I raised an eyebrow. He seriously only needed me because I was human? That explained why he didn't follow after when I ran off into the woods. I ran into the witch's territory and he didn't see where I went and was unable to follow. But that didn't explain how he appeared from thin air to be the hero at the last second. As I thought about that fact, I noticed something. After he replaced the sword into the hilt, I could no longer see it. How did you burst out with a disappearing sword then? I asked. My sword is still here. It's been here the entire time. Try looking at where you saw it last while you unfocus your eyes. It's because of this sword I was able to save you both. I did as I was told. It was a bit difficult, but after a minute I let my sight grow hazy enough for the sword I'd seen before to appear like magic at Nick's waist. The golden hilt glimmered, but when I looked at it directly it disappeared again. It's pretty nice looking. Hard to believe you use it to kill anything. I commented. A hint of a smile came over his face. Its name is the Orchestra. It's a bit finicky. After I couldn't find you, I needed to force it to cut through into the witch's territory. It could have done so at any time and I sort of didn't need to bring you along, but it refused. You don't want to know what I promised it in order to do something it deemed unworthy as saving two humans. But I think you complimenting it pleased it enough to be happy you lived. I didn't know how I felt over a sentient sword being the reason why my life was in danger in the first place. But I was glad it decided I was good enough to save, so I didn't comment on it. Also, why did you give me a blanket? It's hot over here. It's a shock blanket. You're in shock. I almost argued that. It was such a small matter I didn't press it from how exhausted the night made me. The talk of witches, swords and government agents turned my brain to mush, making it impossible to get my thoughts straight. My phone pinged in my pocket. Checking it was a reflex, so I pulled it out to see a notification of an email. A lot of my work was on my phone, so to clear my head I checked to see what the email said. Turns out I needed that shock blanket. I felt myself clutching it as I read what appeared on my phone screen. Another deposit was placed in my account. This time the amount was 10 grand. My hands shook rereading the amount. Did you just pay me? I asked, unable to get all the words out. I apologize, the amount is so low. Agents that are in higher demand or that face powerful creatures get paid more for a job. The witch was on the very low end of payout because it was such a minor threat. Nick explained. My mouth felt dry thinking about what he just said. 12 grand for one day of work. Sure, I nearly died, but that amount of money helped me out a lot towards my goal. Hell, goals I thought to be a dream started to flood back into my head as I looked over my account. My sister raised me when my parents kicked me out and disowned me when I was a teen. I always felt like I needed to pay her back. I took on any job I could, trying to save up to buy her a house so she could stop renting crappy places. Not just a house, I wanted her kids to go to college. And I wanted to pay for the surgery that was looming over my future. I need to head out and make a report, so if... Nick stopped speaking when I suddenly stood up, taking him by the shoulder as the blanket fell to the ground. You said you're a contract worker, right? And if I was your temporary partner, does that mean you don't currently have one? I asked in an excited voice. Well, yes. He answered slowly, not understanding what I was getting at. Can I do more jobs with you? Jobs like this? The questions were practically demands. I didn't care about supernatural creatures or what them being real meant for my new view of the world. I no longer cared I nearly died or the fear I felt from being chased in the woods. I only cared about the big payday this kind of job could bring. I suppose. I do not know as much about the human side of things as I should, so I may require another human partner. But this work is dangerous. Every time you go out into the field you risk your life, each job a gamble. Are you certain you want that as a future? Nick said in a voice sounding more surprised than somber for the topic. I'm positive. Give me your number. Holding out my cell phone, I didn't let go of his shoulder until he took out a card with his number printed on it. Nick didn't know how to put his contact information into my phone, so I quickly did it and put my number into his flip phone. I really need to be going. I'll contact you if any jobs suitable for a human come up. Because I involved a human, there are extra forms to fill out, Nick said as he started to walk away. No rest for the wicked, I see. I commented. He took out his notebook and I needed to tell him it was just an expression. This guy really was clueless about a lot of things. We parted ways. He took his SUV to wherever he needed to be. I sat in my car for a long while thinking over everything that happened and what my future might look like from now on. I was already buying things in my head with money I didn't own just yet. On my way home, I ordered a nice steak dinner for pickup. My clothing was dirty and ruined, so I couldn't sit in the restaurant and eat, but I thought I had earned a nice meal for once. Then, I waited for a message from Nick, not at all caring that this job brought nightmares along with it. I work as a PI and a government agent approached me to help with a case. Part 3. It was 2 weeks until Nick contacted me again about a second case. Even with my savings account looking pretty nice from all the extra jobs I was pulling, I still got excited seeing his number come up on my phone. Nicholas Flint was a government agent that killed supernatural creatures. He wasn't human, but besides his unnatural hair color and blank stare, he didn't appear too strange. His monotone voice was the oddest thing about him, as it made his intentions difficult to understand, but overall he was easy to get along with. I worked as a pretty novice P1 and one doubted my skills would be of use to him. Turns out, just being human helped in some occasions. I wished he would have contacted me sooner. Still, getting an extra job through him helped a lot. I may be risking my life every time I accepted, but it was well worth it. This time we met in my office instead of my car. He brought along a case folder and I was surprised a secret government agent dealing with supernatural creatures used mundane things like case folders. I offered him some coffee which he turned down, so we got straight into the case. There have been several missing homeless men recently. Some bodies have turned up torn to pieces and we cannot place what kind of creature would do such damage. Also, it's difficult to determine which homeless men are victims or have just left the area for different reasons. Nick explained as he started to arrange the photos on my desk. Each photo was fairly gruesome. I'd wanted to be a cop but in the end was unable to do so. I'd looked up things like this for my own preparation for the job I'd never gotten, but my stomach still twisted at the sight. Each person was taken apart on different ways, then just left in wooded areas to be found or eaten by animals. Some scavengers got at them, making it difficult to find the original damage in the bodies due to it being eaten away. I sat looking over each photo wondering why Nicky asked me to help him. I didn't know a thing about supernatural creatures. I didn't even know they were real until recently. I also wasn't a bite mark expert and couldn't tell him what had been munching on these bodies in the woods. I'll do my best to help, but I don't exactly have the resources to be of much use. I admitted after I placed a photo back down on my desk. I would definitely be skipping lunch that day. This case is very low on the list of priorities. I currently do not have a partner and my supervisors will not let me work in the field without one. Unless I have someone working with me, I cannot look into this case and no one else is interested. He explained, as he started to clean off my desk of the files. So, just me being around is helpful? I asked with my arms crossed. Exactly, he said with a small nod. I didn't know how I felt about that. It didn't help my self-esteem in the slightest knowing I was just there to look pretty. In fact, Nick could have gotten anyone else to fill in for his partner. I was the only person free and willing to do a case no one but him cared about. How does your job even work? Doesn't your boss give you cases to solve? How come you can just pick the ones you want? I asked, wondering about his work. I knew less about Nick than I did about supernatural creatures. At times I'm assigned to jobs that are suited to my skill set. If none comes up, I am able to pick from any open cases within reason. There are some creatures out there far too powerful for certain agents to confront. I am the only one interested in closing smaller cases. If I hadn't taken the witch case, or been interested in this one, they would have been passed along to the hunters, Nick said, and his voice was making me a little sleepy despite the information being interesting. The what? I asked, confused. Hunters are a human-run organization with the main goal to kill every supernatural creature. They may use magic to fight, but refuse to work with creatures of the night. The corporation I work for mostly uses supernatural agents. We tolerate each other to get cases solved. I never would have assumed there was more than one agency dealing with things that lurked in the night. It made sense. After nearly getting killed by the witch, I understood how some people could hate anything like that. If Nick wasn't as easygoing as he was, I would have had a bad view on supernatural creatures as a whole. That witch was evil, but Nikki is so non-threatening it made me think there were good creatures out there. Whatever was killing the homeless men on this current case was giving creatures a bad rep. I wondered just how often things like this happened and how it was possible for it to be mostly unnoticed. Alright, let's get started. If we solve this quickly, we can finish some other backlog cases for you. I stood up with my car keys in hand. I was the only employee in my small PI company, so I didn't need to tell anyone I was leaving the office for the day. Nearly all of my jobs came through by email and the rest were directed to my cell phone. I didn't need an office, but it made me seem more official, and I found clients felt more comfortable meeting in one as needed. I locked up wondering when I would be back and how dangerous this job would turn out. We drove a city away, and Nick directed me to a local park near the downtown area. I could already see signs of a homeless population that only got worse as we got closer to the main street. There was a men's shelter right next to the park with about 5 people hanging out on the front steps. I followed Nick towards the building, unsure of what our first task would be. Because he was wearing a suit, he looked pretty official. No one really bothered us as we walked past the huddle of people. A smell drifted out from the small crowd and I forced myself not to react. Trash littered the stone stairs and I hoped I didn't step on anything too unpleasant. Inside the building it smelled of harsh cleaning chemicals and unwashed bodies. A tired-looking receptionist looked at us warily, not wanting the trouble a man in a suit would bring. After showing her his badge and introducing himself, Nick brought out some photos but didn't offer them to her just yet. "I'm sorry to bother you, miss, but recently we have found some deceased men. 5 have been from this area, but the other 3 have yet to be identified. If you are willing, would you look at these photos and see if you recognize any of them?" Nick asked in an official tone. I stood back watching the exchange. The receptionist looked as if this wasn't her first time dealing with something like this. She didn't even look surprised when asked to look at photos of the dead. "Do you have a warrant? For privacy reasons we cannot give out the names of the men who stay here," she replied stiffly. "I do not have a warrant for your list of names. You may contact the local police department to confirm my identity and the fact that I am working on this case. I can come back with one, however, but I wish to have the names to these men as fast as possible," Nick admitted, his voice still without emotion. "Why? These men don't really have anyone looking for them. I've never heard of a cop wanting to deal with people that stay here, let alone care about their names," she replied in a worn-out tone. She wasn't trying to be cruel, just stating some facts. It was her words that finally made me realize we were the only ones looking for what killed these men. I looked around the small entrance, seeing chairs that looked older than myself bolted down to the floor. The building was barely staying together. The small amount of people who cared about the homeless in that city worked with nearly no resources or help. I imagined this was a common sight across the country. I looked back over when Nick responded to the woman. "I don't like the name John Doe. I hate seeing it on 3 photos," he admitted while glancing at the paper in his hands. We all remained silent for a few heavy seconds. Finally, the receptionist held out her hand to look over the photos. She stared at them for a while, trying to place the faces. After some very careful consideration, she wrote down some names on the back of each paper. I've never seen them this cleaned up, so I'm not too sure about the third one. But I'm fairly certain this is who these men are. I haven't seen them for a while and hope they didn't turn out like this. If I give you some other names, could you check on the ones that also haven't been in for a while? There could be all sorts of reasons why, but..." She trailed off, looking a bit worried about keeping her job after giving us information, but knowing it was worth it in the end. Nick nodded and took a few more minutes getting some names, descriptions, and common hangout spots to keep an eye on. He thanked the older woman after everything was collected. He sounded insincere, but that was just because of his odd tone of voice. I could tell he truly respected the receptionist for helping out. We said, "Thank you again," before heading out. "Hey, is having their names going to help us figure out what kind of monster killed them?" I asked once we walked down the stairs and out of earshot of the crowd that gotten larger since we were inside. "No. The names add nothing to this case. My job is to only find and kill the creatures causing trouble. We leave the rest to the police." but getting the location of where they normally stay around helps. We can scout out those areas or ask around for some more information, Nick said as we made our way back to the car. He really didn't need to come by the shelter asking for local homeless hangouts. Just driving around was enough to find a few. We could easily ask any of those people about other spots. This trip was really about trying to find out who these men were. I paused at my car door looking over at Nick and wondering about him. I didn't understand how someone who lacked a natural expressive face cared more about others than most people I'd met. He caught me staring and I couldn't explain myself. Are you really going to interview homeless people about whether they've seen anything strange while wearing that? I asked. He glanced down, a crease of confusion on his normally placid face. What's wrong with my suit? I felt as if it would take too much effort to explain it to him. We started off to conduct our interviews, but I made Nick stay in the car. I bought some coffee and some sandwiches to hand out while I asked questions. I learned a few smokes also helped getting people to talk. I listened patiently, hoping to hear anything interesting. I quickly found out this process was nerve-wracking. Nick needed to come in and rescue me from awkward situations when I started talking to someone who clearly was on the streets due to mental illness or drug abuse. I didn't find them dangerous, but when they started ranting about the government stealing their blood and thoughts, I felt my shoulders tense. By the end of the day, I felt exhausted and without having found anything worthwhile. Nick and I parked the car near a park and got out to stretch our legs and also look over our notes. What do we know so far? I asked him. I was eating a leftover sandwich as my dinner. Nick refused one. I have yet to see him eat or drink anything. Did he even need to eat or drink? Pin that as a mystery to solve later. He opened his small notebook and I noticed it was a different color than the one he had when we first met. Each man was taken from different locations as far as we can tell. So far, all 8 were taken without anyone noticing, and their last known locations are foggy at best. All the strange events we gathered today do not match any supernatural creature I am aware of, nor does the manner of death match any creatures. Nick responded as he looked over his notes. So, we got nothing, I said with a sigh. I don't believe so. We have nothing we can make sense of so far. Efforts are never wasted. They'll prove useful even if it means we just need to wait for results. I wish I could be as forward-thinking as Nicky was. I saw our entire day as a waste and he thought of it as time put towards results. I tossed my sandwich wrapper in the trash while wondering what to do next. So we're going to what? Camp out and watch some random homeless meetup spot until we see something? I asked. It was starting to get dark and I didn't know if we planned on staying in this city overnight. If we were going to keep an eye on some hotspots waiting for some monster to appear, we would need more manpower or to get extremely lucky. Nick was looking through his notebook in the fading light trying to find something. After he spotted what he wanted, he snapped shut his small notebook to focus his attention back into me. The one spot is near a bridge, or rather a tunnel. If there is a grocery store nearby, we need to purchase some pickled eggs. I believe there is someone else we can ask. Huh? Without explaining himself further, he got into the car ready to go. I just needed to trust him. Nick was the expert on these things after all. I looked up some directions, and a short trip later we were on our way towards a bridge with 2 massive jars of pickled eggs. I still didn't understand what was going on as I followed behind Nick carrying one bag of the eggs, while Nick had the other. Under the bridge was a pedestrian tunnel and a bike path. Above it was an ancient-looking set of railroad tracks that saw very limited use. Dim yellow lights lined the tunnel. Nick put an arm out to stop me from walking too close to the tunnel's entrance. Once he knew I would stay put, he placed a jar of eggs in front of the entrance. Then he walked back over to where I was standing as each light inside the tunnel started to go out one by one until the entire entrance was pitch black. Not even the surrounding light from the park we stood inside leaked into the darkness. I waited, with fear starting to seep into my stomach. Anything could happen. I trusted Nick, but he was a bit clueless at times. I wasn't exactly safe if our guest acted in a way he didn't expect. I waited and then I started to hear the wind. It took me a few seconds to realize that was not the wind blowing through the tunnel. It sounded too rhythmic. Almost like breathing. And it was getting closer. I should have bought a gun after getting involved with these jobs. If I lived, I swore I would get one as fast as possible. Fear started to show on my face, but Nick remained as calm as ever. The breathing sounds got louder and louder until finally something appeared from the tunnel. It was a finger. A finger so massive it barely fit through the entrance. It was twisted and gray, tipped with a long claw of a nail. Using a chipped nail, it brought the jar of pickled eggs into the darkness. Some wet sounds came until something else peeked from that dark tunnel. An eye. I work as a PI and a government agent approached me to help with a case. Part 4. It blinked as it judged us. Then it moved and the other eye took its place. The face behind the tunnel was so massive both eyes could not fit behind the entrance at the same time. That didn't make any sense. Beside, the tunnel was filled in with bricks and earth. This thing, whatever it was, simply could not be inside the tunnel based on the massive scale of the few features I did see. What do we have here? An odd pair to be sure. The voice was low and booming. I smelled putrid breath as it spoke and I forced myself not to react. An unfinished stone and a human. Not just a human. One that is also unfinished. A human that can never fully be a. I felt rage replace my fear of this creature. It took one look at me and saw something I desperately tried to hide and refused to talk about unless absolutely necessary. I was ready to try and kill this thing with my bare hands, but Nick stopped the both of us. Without his face changing, he grabbed the back of my shirt to drag me back when I wasn't even aware I had taken a step forward, ready for a fight. Don't listen to it. It's only trying to get you worked up. It's in their nature, he said, but it didn't help me calm down. What he said, half rock, and half human. They're only words. The creature spoke with a cruel laugh afterwards. Nick, can I borrow your sword? I asked loud enough for the tunnel beast to hear. Nick's sword wasn't visible, but I knew it was there. He wouldn't go on a case trying to find a monster unharmed. Skylar, please don't kill the bridge troll. Nick replied in such a matter-of-fact tone it snapped me from my fighting mood. I looked from him to the dark tunnel with only the one eye staring back. This massive thing was a troll? It was under a bridge, so that was understandable. I crossed my arms, not happy about not being able to do anything, but I let Nick speak. We are looking for the one killing homeless men in this city. One of which may have been taken from this park. I was hoping you saw something, Nick said and gestured towards the bag containing the other jar of eggs in my hand. I may have. But who cares? They're just trash. Not worth the time. At least their death provided some creature some fun. I felt my neck get hot and wanted to smash the jar of eggs. I didn't know if this thing was just saying things to piss us off or if he really thought like this. If my sister didn't take me in after my parents kicked me out, I might have ended up as these men, only much worse. We both worked ourselves down to the bone to pay rent and have enough to eat. We got lucky. The men that were killed could be on the streets for all sorts of reasons they couldn't control. I was not going to stand and listen to this thing insult 8 people who died through no fault of their own. Nick was also offended. Because of his lack of expression, I didn't know it until he drew his sword, the delicate thing making a musical sound as it appeared. Holding it out, he stared at the tunnel with his eyes blank and hand steady. If that's the truth, then the same goes for yourself. If those men are trash only worth entertainment and death, then a troll no one cares for can provide the same. We all fell silent. I could feel the air press in around my shoulders and it suddenly felt hotter than before. It was impossible to read Nick's intentions. I honestly thought he was going to go through with killing it until he placed his sword back into the hilt and it faded from sight. I brought you eggs in exchange for information. I am looking for the killer of these men. They are not trash. They're people. You're a troll with a terrible personality, but I can still respect you enough to make a basic exchange. I felt some tension fade at his words. At least those two weren't going to get into a fight. I wasn't expecting the troll to be touched by his words, but rather only thankful he was still alive. When it spoke again, the tone of voice was softer. I have nothing better to do all day but watch the ones in the park. It's like bird watching for humans. I saw a man get forced inside a white van and not return. I am unaware if he is one of your victims, but it is the only strange event I've seen with these homeless humans. Some just stop showing up for unknown reasons. The troll admitted. I wasn't expecting actual useful information from this creature. This didn't fully answer our question, but it did open up our investigation to other ideas. Was someone kidnapping men to feed to a pet monster? Or was there a human-looking beast out there driving around picking up victims no one would miss? My train of thought was derailed when the troll spoke again. I squinted as if it was smiling. I spotted this van for a few nights in a row before it took the man. I've seen it again, so maybe, it may strike again soon. Give me the other jar and I'll tell you what took these men. I looked over to Nick, heart beating. Even after everything, I wanted to trust this monster. Then again, with the troll's track record, I wasn't sure if it was telling the truth or just messing with us. Nick took the bag and walked over to set the jar of eggs within reach. Thankfully, the troll wasn't just trying to lure Nick in to attack him. The eye disappeared and the fingernail took the jar. We waited and was positive the creature left before the voice came faintly as if from a distance. The one who took them is the most frightening monster on this planet. One not bound by rules and the one that has done the most amount of destruction throughout the ages. The voice was echoing through the tunnel as the lights started to flicker back on. We both stared down into the now empty tunnel, wondering about the parting words of the troll. I didn't understand what kind of creature it was talking about, so I looked over to Nick. "Do you know what it meant?" I asked. "I have no idea," he said without a hint of shame. In the end, we needed to camp out and watch the park all night. At least we knew we could be in the right area. If the troll wasn't lying to us, the white van could come prowling down the road looking for a new target. We sat on a park bench watching the street. Nick was flipping through his notebooks looking for any sort of clue on what monster we could be facing. Beside ourselves, two men camped out huddled in piles of dirty blankets a bit of a way away but within eyesight. We could watch them and the road at the same time. The night was cool because it was still spring. I should have brought a jacket. After a while Nick gave up looking for any hints hidden in his notebook. He had a hint of frustration on his face. "I must apologize for my overreaction earlier," Nick said, making me raise an eyebrow. "That was an overreaction?" I gave him a smile, not knowing if he could tell I was teasing him. The dark park made me feel uneasy. An unknown threat was out there and might not take our meddling lightly. Every time I went on a case with Nick, I was risking my life. Overall, I felt as if it was worth it. I would never reach my goals working the normal jobs that came along. Yawning, I was a little surprised I could be tired and nervous at the same time. Looking back on the day, I realized I really didn't help out in this case at all. I slouched down on the park bench, feeling the same sense of frustration start up in my stomach. Nick noticed my mood but didn't look as if he knew how to ask about what was wrong. "I don't feel helpful," I said. "What happened to your old partner? Did they get a transfer or something?" Honestly, Nick hadn't told me much. I really hit the ground running, accepting that things lurked in the night. I didn't have a lot of information and figured it was because all of this was secret government stuff. "She died." I sat up at his answer. His voice didn't change, but I sensed a shift in his mood. Nick wasn't looking in my direction, or rather, he couldn't bring himself to. Remembering his pink cell phone with all the charms, I felt my arms prickle. It was a phone that should belong to a girl. A memento from his last partner. How recent did this happen? I didn't feel right to ask. "I'm sorry," I said in an awkward tone. He didn't react. Just kept staring forwards. Not only was I not helping and just there for a payout, I brought up something uncomfortable. Just as I started feeling awful about sitting next to the agent, he rescued the conversation. "I'm glad you're here. I do not wish to be alone so soon after what happened. All the other partner options are not ideal. Most would just use me for what I am instead of trying to strike up a conversation. I am not experienced in dealing with others, so I feel as if I may make things difficult for you," Nick said as he finally looked over. "It's scary how nice you are." Confusion fluttered over his face, but he accepted my answer. I wanted to know what Nick was. The troll called him an unfinished stone. It really didn't feel as if I could ask him about it after he mentioned how others would use him for simply being whatever he was. In the future I would find the right time to sneak the question in. Because I was looking in his direction, I noticed some movement over his shoulder. On reflex I grabbed him and pulled Nick off the bench just as a clawed hand darted out from the bush behind the wooden bench. Out from the darkness sprang a lanky hissing creature. The body long and deformed. Milky white eyes glared at us as its mouth opened nearly ear to ear. The skin was a sickly gray and I could see the creature's ribs. One swat of those claws could easily cut us in half. "What the hell is that?" I shouted, startled at the sudden appearance. "A minor creature. Not much of a threat," Nick replied with his hand hovering at his waist. I waited for one of us to break the stalemate. With his sword, Nick could easily take out this thing. However, he was hesitating. The problem was his sword was too powerful. It would dig into the ground and create all sorts of damage wherever he directed his attack. We didn't know if anyone else was camping out in the small area of trees, since earlier today we were told people often did so instead of sleeping out in the open. One swing of the sword would kill this monster, but also anyone else unlucky enough to be in its way. The creature acted first. It launched itself off the park bench towards Nick's face with claws out. I was terrified but still moved. I slammed my shoulder into this creature, knocking it off course and to the ground. I felt bones crack against my shoulder. It scrambled on the ground, making yowling sounds, trying to get back into position to attack again. It arched its back on all fours, ready to bite our faces off, when movement from Nick made it pause. Out from a suit pocket he pulled out a bag of beef jerky. I stared at him, mouth slightly open. He was appeasing a twisted creature made of nightmares with a snack. Tossing it in front of us, the thing darted over, taking the bag in its wide mouth. Without taking its eyes off of us, it backed up under the bench. Somehow, the thing sank into the dark shadow of the bench, leaving us alone. "What the fuck?" I whispered, mostly to myself. I believe the troll sent this creature after us as amusement. It may be watching right now having a laugh. The thing that attacked us is part of a race that hates agents almost as much as it likes snacks. Nick let his hands drop now that the threat passed. I looked over my shoulder towards the tunnel. The lights were still on, but I believed the troll was watching and hoped that it was disappointed in the outcome. After I heard tires screeching, I knew the troll had won in the end. It distracted us from our job. I cursed again and started off as fast as my legs would carry me towards the road. The two homeless men were still sleeping and somehow not woken up by the brief fight. If the tires belonged to the white van, we wanted to find out if it could have taken someone else we didn't see before. I ran right into the middle of the empty street looking around, trying to see what car made the noise. My heart sank when I spotted the back of a white van peeling off down the straight road. We didn't have any means of going after it. Turns out we didn't need to go after it. Nick ran so fast he was unable to stop in the middle of the street. He skidded to a stop and needed to double back to where I stood. If the situation wasn't so dire, the sight would have been comical. Again, his hand went to his waist and this time he drew his sword. In one lightning-fast movement, he drew the blade and sent a thin shock wave of destruction down the street towards the van. A burst of wind blasted my face and I needed to raise my hands so I didn't see the impact, but I heard it. A terrible crashing sound came from down the street. It was so loud it hurt my ears even from a distance. When I lowered my hands, my jaw dropped. Nick had cut the van in half, each side falling away from each other. One crashed into a parked car, the other went forward a few more feet just to slam into a telephone pole. The side that hit the parked car tipped over on its side, revealing the inside of the van, where a man dressed in rags lay limp. He was tied down to the van wall, ensuring he was the only one that was safe from the crash. I ran behind Nick, who kept running to go check on the driver. Along the road was debris scattered from the now split van. At first, I assumed they were tools. I was so concerned on getting the man from the destroyed van I didn't focus on them. When I knew he was knocked out and not dead, I started to look around unsure of what I was seeing. Saws, hammers, drills, bear traps, and more littered the road. Along the walls were more of the dangerous-looking objects. I finally clued into what I was seeing after I spotted the stains on some of the tools. The van was a place of torture. All of these instruments were chosen to inflict harm on a human. I thought back to the bodies of the 8 men and everything made sense. We were never looking for a supernatural creature. I was careful as I got the man untied and got him onto the road. Nick pulled the driver from the front of the crushed van, face bloody and nose broken. He might have been saved by the airbag. Sirens started to come closer as dogs barked around us. The crash attracted a lot of attention and I wasn't sure I knew how to explain it to the police. The driver is alive. I am not certain if he'll make it through. Getting down on our level, Nick took off his jacket to let the man we rescued use it as a pillow until an ambulance arrived. I looked around, still unable to believe this entire time we were looking for a serial killer. The state of the bodies looked beyond anything a human could do. I now know that was foolish. Back then in my mind, crimes like this only happened in the podcasts I listened to while staking out a cheating husband. It never felt real, and being suddenly forced to face the horrors of my own kind made me feel in a way I couldn't describe. How are we going to explain all of this? I asked and looked around at the sudden chaos. The same blank expression on his face was my response. Just as flashing lights started to color the street, Nick shrugged. I have no idea. That did not make me feel better in the slightest. I was grilled for hours over what happened. They separated us. I was smart enough to not say a word no matter how stressed I felt. After 6 hours, a female lawyer came into the room. She simply gave the detective a sheet of paper. Then I was free to go. I sent Nick a text the moment I got my phone back. His response was, "I'll talk to you later." I waited for 2 more days until he sent me a message asking if I could meet him in the park near my office. I wasn't busy, so I went, wanting to know the outcome of our case. He looked terrible, as if he hadn't slept since the last time we saw each other. He still gave me a wave when I walked over to sit on the bench beside him. He explained the corporation cleaned up the mess, making it look like a regular accident. The man who was driving was in fact the killer. Because he used different tools and even some jaws of dead animals, the bodies looked as if they were torn apart by something not human. Nick fiddled with his phone and a few seconds later mine pinged. A payment of $1,000 was deposited in my account. I honestly forgot about money because of everything that happened. This is all that was left over from doing a big cover-up. I'm sorry, it's barely anything. Because the case had a human culprit, my job didn't want to pay anything. I put my foot down on that, saying you should get something for your time. I stared at my phone knowing this was pretty good for a single day of working. Nick was acting as if that amount was chump change though. He did mention bigger cases paid out more, but I had no clue just how much more that was. Nick, you know $1,000 is a pretty decent amount of money, right? Some people don't even earn that in a week. He stared at me, that blank expression saying something I didn't want to read into. This dang bastard was probably richer than I would ever be in my life because he wasn't human and could fight monsters for a massive profit, all the while being unaware of that fact. If he wasn't so nice, I would be upset. His phone rang. He answered it in a language I'd never heard before. Soon he hung up and apologized, saying he needed to leave for work again. Call me anytime you have a job you think I can handle. I might be useful for something someday. I let out a chuckle and I thought I spotted a hint of a smile on his face. He promised if anything came up he would send me a message. Soon I was left alone in the park on a beautiful sunny day, but unable to really appreciate the weather. I kept staring down at the new payment, feeling a dark pit in my stomach. The images of those 8 men came flashing into my mind. Thanks to Nick, they got their names back. And because he cared, there would be no more victims from their killer. I knew it wasn't enough. Things like this could keep happening. Yet again I felt useless. I searched for the website of the shelter where we asked for names a few days ago. Finding the right page, I could easily donate my 1 day of work to the shelter. I knew it really didn't solve the overall problem, but at least it might help a few people for a little while. I stared at the charity receipt email, telling myself the reason for the donation was for tax deductions at the end of the year. I placed my phone back into my pocket to get ready to head back to my little office. I needed to learn more about supernatural creatures and become a better contract worker for the bigger jobs. After I make sure my sister was set, I had some other ideas for the funds I would be risking my life for. It might not do much overall, but as Nick has said, efforts are never really wasted.